She drove off a 30-foot cliff, walked away without a single injury, and was back competing before most people even found out it happened. That is Katelynn Boren, the teenager from a small Utah desert town who became one of the most recognizable faces on Matt's off-road recovery, while simultaneously building a professional competition career that existed entirely outside of YouTube, long before any camera crew ever showed up. By the time this story is over, you will understand why what the channel showed you was always the surface, and why the real version of this story is something Matt never sat down and told. There is a specific kind of credibility in the off-road world that cannot be manufactured. You cannot buy it. You cannot be handed it because you are young or interesting or good for the camera. You have to earn it on the course, in front of experienced drivers who have been doing this for 2 decades, in terrain that does not care how old you are or what your name is. Katelynn Boren started earning it at age 13. She grew up in Hurricane, Utah, a small town in Washington County, sitting east of Zion National Park, flanked on all sides by red sandstone formations and canyon country that is as technically demanding as anywhere in the American West. It is not a soft landscape. It rewards people who pay attention and punishes people who don't, which means the people who grow up in it tend to develop a particular kind of spatial awareness early on. Katelynn was no exception. Her father, Kevin Boren, had been involved in rock crawling for over 20 years before his daughter ever got behind the wheel competitively. The sport operates as a 2-person discipline, a driver who navigates a purpose-built or heavily modified vehicle through coned gates set on rock faces, and a spotter who runs alongside on foot, reading angles and calling every move. For years, Kevin competed with various partners. Finding someone consistent, someone whose judgment he trusted completely, was a recurring challenge. His daughter got old enough to drive, and the answer became obvious. He put her in the seat. He moved to spotter, and she understood the sport faster than he or anyone watching expected her to. "I've been driving since I was 11, she said in one of her first public interviews, with no performance in it, just a fact being stated plainly. Over time, he would put me in the driver's seat, and we would just go and play, run a few trails, and so I learned how to drive that way." She entered her first W-Rock competition at 13. W-Rock, the World Extreme Rock Crawling Series, is not a recreational event. It draws competitors from across the country. It runs timed courses on genuine rock formations. The people lining up at the start gates are experienced adults who have spent years and significant money building and maintaining their rigs. Katelynn Boren was a teenager from southern Utah, in her father's XJ, and she finished on the podium in her first full season. Not somewhere near the podium, on it. She placed first in both the Eastern and Western Point Series in that initial campaign, competing in the Sportsman C class against the full field. Kevin would later write about standing on the podium with her. He said he teared up every time. Not the way a parent tears up at a graduation or a recital, but the deeper kind, the kind that comes from watching someone choose something genuinely difficult and then be extraordinary at it. And if you think that was surprising, stay with me, because this next part is why the whole story matters. Most young athletes who come up through a niche motorsport like this have one job: compete. Someone else handles the funding. A parent pays the bills. Sponsors come later, after years of results build enough of a profile to attract attention. The athlete shows up and drives. That is not how Katelynn operated. After her first full season, Kevin sat her down and was direct with her. Rock crawling is expensive. Entry fees, travel across multiple states, vehicle upkeep, parts, the costs compound quickly. If she wanted to continue the following year, they needed outside funding. He told her plainly that she needed to go and find sponsors. She was 14 years old when she picked up the phone. She built her own list of target companies, worked out what she wanted to say, and started making calls. By the time she was done, she had secured partnerships with Maxxis Tires, Yukon Gear, and Axle, the Car Barn, and several others. Not because someone connected her, not because a parent handled the outreach, because she decided that quitting was not an option and figured out what needed to happen to avoid it. That list of sponsors expanded steadily as her competition results continued to follow. By the time she was in her mid-teens, her roster had grown to include Warren Industries, Raceline Wheels, Goat Built, Summit Machine, Adams Driveshaft, ORI Struts, Burton Built, PRP, JM Rigging, and the Utah Public Lands Alliance, an organization dedicated to protecting and maintaining public land access in Utah, which chose Katelynn specifically as a sponsored competitor in the Professional Pro Mod Series because she had been actively involved in trail maintenance work and was committed to speaking publicly about responsible land stewardship throughout the season. That is not a standard sponsorship for a teenage rock crawler. The Utah Public Lands Alliance saw in Katelynn someone who understood that the terrain she competed on was worth protecting and who was willing to do real work toward that end, not just put a logo on the buggy. Kevin described the travel that all of this made possible as some of the best time he ever spent alone with his daughter. Roughly 90 hours on the road in a single season, just the two of them, long stretches of desert highway between events, before the courses themselves even started. The number that came next, nobody who followed this channel expected it. In September of 2021, Caitlyn Borne went off a 30-foot cliff. She described it later with the kind of understatement that only makes sense if you understand how she processes these things. She called it a nasty tumble. The Jeep XJ, the Cherokee she had been running since she started competing, the vehicle that had carried her through 2-point series championships, through hundreds of hours of preparation, through every early course she had learned the sport on, was totaled, completely gone. She walked away without injury. There was no extended absence from competition, no visible crisis about whether to continue. What came immediately after was a practical question. What gets built next? The XJ was done. The level she was targeting going forward required a different machine, one purpose-engineered for the Pro Mod class, not adapted from a road vehicle. She commissioned a JHF goat-built buggy and aimed at the professional tier. Pro Mod is the top competitive division in the Pec Rock series. The vehicles are custom fabricated from the ground up. The courses are significantly more technical than the sportsman classes. Gates are tighter. Rock faces are steeper. The margin between a clean run and a roll is narrower. Most drivers who eventually reach it do so after years of working through lower classes and building up to that level of vehicle and course complexity. Katelynn had competed in Sportsman C, then Sportsman B. Now she was skipping the intermediate steps and going straight to the professional class. She did it at 16. In a profile published during this period, she listed the progression plainly. 3 different classes, 2 different vehicles. When asked where she saw herself in the future, the answer was not a media-polished statement. I hope I'm continuing to do what I love. That was the whole answer. Direct, unembellished, exactly what she meant. At a B-Rock Grand National event in Farmington, New Mexico, she was asked what the sport does for her. She answered without pause, "It fills my soul." In 2022, she tied for first place at the B-Rock Grand Nationals. The following year, she moved officially into the professional Pro Mod series. The results followed her into the new class. At a point in the story when walking away would have been understandable, after a totaled vehicle and a 30-foot drop, she came back in a more competitive machine and performed at a higher level than before. Here's what the comments kept asking. And here's the answer they never got, until now. When Caitlyn Boren began appearing in Matt's off-road recovery content, the audience had a lot of questions. Most of them were answered slowly, across multiple videos, through context clues and brief references. Some of them were never answered on the channel at all. One of the things that did not get discussed at any length was this. She was also a beauty queen. Not as a one-time thing, not as a distant hobby that barely counted. She held the title of Miss Hurricane, representing her hometown in the regional pageant circuit, while simultaneously competing as a professional-level rock crawler against adult drivers in one of the more physically demanding motorsports disciplines in the country. Those two worlds do not typically share the same person. The culture around competitive off-road racing and the culture around pageant competition exist in almost entirely separate spaces. Different aesthetics, different expectations of how a young woman presents herself, what she prioritizes, how she spends her time. The people in one world rarely overlap with the people in the other. Katelynn was operating at a competitive level in both, as a teenager, without treating it as a contradiction or a story worth explaining. Her profile in Off-Road Vixens, a publication focused on women in the off-road industry, listed her personal interests outside competition as the outdoors and tennis. The same entry that documented a professional competition buggy build, a B-Rock Pro Mod campaign, and a multi-brand sponsor roster also recorded her advice to other women looking to enter the sport. Be your most favorite you that you can be. Don't forget to smile, and don't forget who helped you get to where you are now. That is not a PR line. That is how she actually talks. Practical, genuine, zero performance in it. The pageant circuit and the competition course ran in parallel for her because she never saw them as alternatives. They were both just things she did. The identity she brought to Matt's off-road recovery was not constructed for the channel. It was already there, fully formed, with years of context behind it that the videos themselves never had the time or the inclination to unpack. At this point in the story, most people walked away. What she did instead is the part nobody talks about. Matt's off-road recovery operates out of southern Utah. The geography matters here. Hurricane, Utah, where Caitlyn Borne grew up and where she still lives, is squarely within the same canyon country where the channel produces its content. The overlap between her world and the channel's world was never random. It was a function of proximity and community. The Brerock circuit draws heavily from southern Utah because the terrain there is exceptional for the sport. Sand Hollow State Park, the surrounding BLM land, the sandstone corridors of Washington County. These are not just scenic backdrops. They are the specific geography that produces competitive rock crawlers at a higher rate than almost anywhere else in the country. Multiple Utah teams regularly dominate national-level competition across multiple classes. Caitlyn was already a known quantity in that community long before any MOR video featured her. She had a sponsor roster. She had a national competition record. She had walked away from a 30-foot drop and come back in a better machine. When she appeared on screen, the credibility was not performed. It was documented, verifiable, and pre-existing. What the channel's audience responded to, whether they could identify it clearly or not, was that authenticity. She did not carry herself like someone who needed validation from the camera. She carried herself like someone who had already done the thing, in front of a harder audience, under more demanding conditions than a YouTube recovery video. Because that was true. The comment sections of videos she appeared in consistently ran heavy with the same questions. Who is she? How old is she? Where did she come from? What is her background? The channel answered some of these in pieces, across time, as she appeared more regularly. It answered them in the way recovery content answers things, through glimpses and context, not through dedicated profiles or biographical detail. What it didn't show was the years of pre-existing work that made her appearance on screen make sense. The 14-year-old cold-calling tire companies, the rebuilt buggy after a cliff crash, the parallel life as a pageant title holder, the trail maintenance work that earned her a conservation sponsorship at 16. None of that was on the channel, because the channel was not in the business of running that kind of story. One phone call, one conversation, that's all it took to change the direction of everything. In December 2024, at the W Rock West event held in Cedar City, Utah, Caitlyn Boren and Kevin Boren took first place in the Pro Mod shootout. She stood at the top of the results in the professional tier of a national rock crawling series. Not at 16, not as a novelty. As a competing professional who had worked her way through 3 competitive classes over the better part of a decade. The arc of her competition career is worth looking at clearly, because the MOR audience tended to absorb her as a YouTube presence rather than as what she primarily was, an athlete with a serious and documented record. She started at 13 in Sportsman C with a stock class XJ. She won. She moved to Sportsman B with the buggy. She won. She tied for the Grand National title in 2022. She moved to Pro Mod for 2023 as a sponsored professional. She continued competing through 2024 and took first place at the Cedar City event. That trajectory is not luck, and it is not the result of being featured on a popular YouTube channel. It predates the YouTube exposure entirely. What the MOR audience saw was the end product of a process that had been running for years before the camera arrived. A young woman who had already built a genuine competitive identity in a demanding sport, had already learned how to manage sponsorships, had already survived a serious crash and rebuilt, and had already developed the kind of calm on rock that only comes from having done it hundreds of times in high-stakes conditions. That is the version of Caitlyn Borne that the channel never fully explained, and that most people who know her name through YouTube have never fully understood. Her words of wisdom to other women coming into the off-road world were short and specific. Don't forget who helped you get to where you are now. That is a statement that only makes sense if you have actually been somewhere. If you have a real path behind you, and real people on it with you, and you understand that the credit doesn't start or end with you. For Caitlyn, the credit starts with a father who moved from the driver's seat to the spotter position and handed her the wheel. With a mother and family structure that supported years of travel and competition. With the southern Utah community that has quietly produced some of the best rock crawlers in the country without much national attention. With the sponsors she called herself at 14 because she was not willing to stop. And if you think that was surprising, stay with me because this next part is why the whole story matters. The story of Caitlyn Boren sits inside a larger story that the off-road YouTube space does not often tell directly. The sport she competes in, Butyu Rios K rock crawling, is almost invisible to mainstream audiences. It does not have the television reach of NASCAR or the social media infrastructure of motocross. It runs on regional events across the American West, in front of crowds that show up because they are part of the community, not because a streaming platform is broadcasting it. The people who do it well are not famous outside of it. They are simply very good at something that most people will never try. Katelynn grew up inside that world, which means her reference point for success was never YouTube metrics or comment counts. It was podiums. It was clean runs. It was the judgment of experienced drivers who had been doing this before she was born and who had no incentive to tell her she was good, unless she actually was. That grounding is visible in every piece of footage she appears in, whether it is a Butyu Rios competition video or a Matt's off-road recovery production. She is not performing for the camera. She is not adjusting her behavior because an audience is watching. She talks the same way in every context, direct, specific, no filler, because the camera is not the primary relationship she is managing. The terrain is. For the audience of a channel like Matt's Off-Road Recovery, that quality reads as authenticity, and it is. But it is not the kind of authenticity that gets manufactured by putting someone interesting in front of a lens. It is the kind that comes from years of doing something real, in a context where the results speak for themselves, before anyone with a YouTube channel ever noticed. She has continued competing. She has continued building sponsorships. She has continued engaging with land stewardship and trail work in southern Utah. She is, at the time of this video, still based in Hurricane, the same small town where her father put her behind the wheel of an XJ and told her to feel the terrain. The YouTube audience found Caitlyn Borne through Matt's Off-Road Recovery, but Caitlyn Borne was already built before that audience ever arrived. The real story of Caitlyn Borne is not the story of a girl who got discovered. It is the story of someone who built something genuine, in a sport almost nobody outside of it has heard of, long before any camera crew showed up, and who happened to be exactly who she appeared to be when the cameras finally did. She is still competing, still working within the off-road community that shaped her, still running courses with her father alongside his spotter, the way they have done it since she was 13 years old on the Red Rock outside Hurricane, Utah. The next chapter of this story will be written on a course somewhere in the American Southwest, in a pro mod buggy, with Kevin Bourne on foot calling every gate, not on a YouTube channel. So here is the question this story leaves you with. Caitlyn built all of this before anyone outside the sport was watching. Now that people are watching, do you think the attention changes anything about who she is? Or is this exactly the kind of person the camera can't alter? Drop your answer in the comments.